That was really our challenge. Like, how do we make something that people can relate to, that they feel excited about? Where do we find a delight? The stories of, oh, wow, that's wonderful. I want to see that. I want to try that. To really put this in a different category.
Design has the potential to help us solve some of the world's most pressing problems, but few designers and entrepreneurs recognize that potential. Paul Lambert, co-founder and CEO of a company called Quilt, sees design as a tool to drive the adoption of climate change mitigation technologies. That's why he's partnered with industrial designers Maaike Evers and Mike Simonian, who are helping the team at Quilt rethink how we heat and cool our homes, which is a major contributor to the average home's carbon footprint.
We spoke with Maaike, Mike, and Paul about how they approach the challenge of designing a process as well as a product, bringing fresh eyes to familiar problems, and how they collaborated with engineers to create a product that's both beautiful and highly functional. This is Design Better, where we explore creativity at the intersection of design and technology. I'm Eli Woolery.
And I'm Aaron Walter. You can get ad-free episodes, bonus content, discounted workshops, and access to our monthly AMAs with big names in design and tech by becoming a Design Better premium subscriber. It's also the best way to support the show. Visit designbetterpodcast.com/subscribe to learn more. We'll return to the conversation after this quick break. Few things frustrate designers quite as much as seeing the UI that they've been meticulously designing botched when it's built out. But Zeppelin can help you make every design to dev handoff efficient and accurate so you can nail every release on time and on budget. Zeppelin documents your design system, user journeys, design specs, and code snippets so your developers know exactly what to build and everyone has a shared understanding of your product. And Zeppelin integrates with your entire tool stack, including Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, Jira, and Storybook. Plus, Zeppelin has a new plan where you can get unlimited seats for one flat rate for just $15 a month. Other tools are charging $15 or more per developer seat. With Zeppelin, you get unlimited seats for just $15. That means you can invite your entire team or freelance clients without worrying about being hit with a big, unexpected bill. Design Better listeners can get their first month of the basic plan for free with code DESIGNBETTER. All caps, just one word, Design Better. Just go to zeppelin.io and use code DESIGNBETTER to get your first month of the basic plan for free. That's zeppelin.io, zeppelin.io, and use the code DESIGNBETTER. Build better workflows and collaborative relationships between design and development with Zeppelin. And now, back to the show.
Maaike Evers, Mike Simonian, and Paul Lambert, welcome to Design Better.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Very excited to have you all here. So this is sort of a new format for us. We definitely have had multiple guests on before, but we've not to this point had two different sort of entities that have worked together on the same show. So this will be an interesting new type of exploration. But maybe we can just start out with a brief introduction. Maaike and Mike, could you just talk a little bit about your design firm? And then we'll pass it over to Paul to talk about his work at Quilt.
Sure. Our studio is called Mike and Maaike. We design products, typically furniture, technology products. Really, the subject matter we design runs a pretty broad gamut. And we're in San Francisco. We like to take an approach that's very thoughtful. That's kind of like the hallmark of our work, is really to think deeply about what we design and try to distill things down to their sort of simplest, most effective version of themselves.
Paul, tell us a little bit about Quilt.
So Quilt is a company that is trying to elevate the heat pump category to something that consumers are really excited about bringing into their lives. And the reason we're doing that is we think it's a really effective way to accelerate the energy transition and thereby slow down and hopefully help stop climate change. So we are building a heat pump for homes. And a big part of that is, like I said, creating something people are really excited about bringing to their homes. So design is a huge component to that. And Mike and Maaike have been with us since literally the very beginning. I started speaking with them before Quilt was even a company because I knew how sort of essential it was. And it was just really fortuitous that we got connected. It's actually not purely fortuitous. My co-founder actually was the one who connected us, but he wasn't even on the team yet at that point, to give you a sense of how early it was.
That's great. So Eli and I are interested in what you're doing because we're interested in folks who are designing for the future. And sometimes that looks very big and audacious and sort of unexpected. And sometimes it can be the thing that is so familiar that we no longer have eyes to see that. Curious, how do you choose to work on HVAC systems as a way to address climate change versus any number of other things that you could have jumped on?
It was a surprising answer to the question of where can I have the biggest impact on climate change? And I've never worked in HVAC in my life. So why is that the answer? It's because I wanted to do something that would leverage the skills and network I already had, which was largely in consumer technology. And if you look at consumers, they only buy fossil fuels in two parts of their life. So if you're going to effectuate the energy transition, which is all about getting off fossil fuels, you got to fix one of those two problems. And it's kind of a beautifully simplifying thing that there's really only two. So where do people buy fossil fuels? They buy gas. Well, they put it in their car at the pump and in their home. They put it in the furnace. And the car side 2 years ago was clearly going really well, and it's still going pretty well. Tons of excitement about Tesla and the other EV makers. But if you look at the emissions, this was really surprising to me, but homes are actually more. So homes are 20% of all emissions. Personal vehicles are about 15%. And the level of excitement, investment, design thinking, just kind of innovation going into the home category and around decarbonization was much, much less. So it seemed like there was this huge opportunity, kind of a mismatch between the level of investment and the opportunity. And it turns out the biggest driver by far in the home is the HVAC system. After HVAC, it's hot water. And if you can take care of those two, you basically can decarbonize a whole home. There's also cooking, of course, but it's actually very small by volume. So that's how I got into HVAC. I was just trying to look to see where I could make the most impact given the sort of skill set I'd already developed and network I had.
Can we pause there and just clarify some stuff? So decarbonizing the home and switching over to an electric heat pump system versus presumably a natural gas heat pump. So it's really about heating. That's the purchase that you're talking about, the buying carbon?
Yeah, so you're right. I'm probably a little bit too jargony here. So oil and gas, fossil fuels. Where do people exchange their money for those? In the home, they get a bill every month, right, from whoever your provider is. And most people in America use combustion, burning, natural gas to heat their homes. They might also use fuel oil. Some people still use wood. But generally, it's a fire-based thing, and it's almost always fossil fuels. With heat pumps, it's really exciting because it's an electric way to create heat that's way, way, way more efficient than traditional electric heaters. So a traditional electric heater is like a toaster. It's an electric resistive heater. And those actually just use a lot of electricity to produce heat. And those are very, very expensive compared to fossil fuel solutions. But heat pumps are like 4 times more efficient. Like ours is over 400% efficient, which sounds like it breaks the laws of physics, but it doesn't. And because it's this insane efficiency, it can actually be cost competitive with fossil fuels. So it allows people to get onto an electric system in their home and off of burning things. And the reason that's such a big deal is burning things produces carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is what is driving climate change. So if we can stop burning things, we can slow down climate change and reduce all those emissions. You also just get a much more comfortable home too. That's the other big point, is because you can individually heat and cool every room. You get rid of all these problems around, hey, the bedroom is a different temperature than the living room. And it's also a lot more efficient because you don't have to heat and cool empty rooms. Like yesterday, I was trying to cool my living room because it was a hot day, but we didn't have to cool the bedrooms because nobody was in there. So you save a lot of energy that way as well. And the reason you can't do that with a fire is you wouldn't put a fire in every room of your house. That'd be kind of crazy, but heat pumps are safe. So it allows you to have a different architecture and frankly, a much better way to heat and cool your home.
Paul, I'm curious, like if we're switching over to these electric heat pumps, how do we also think about how that electricity is generated? Is that part of the calculation of how you're thinking about your company?
Yeah, it's a huge part of it. If you look at the emissions from heating and cooling a home, there are 2 classes. There's on-site and there's off-site or grid-sourced. And so the on-site ones, you move to an electric heat pump, you've gotten rid of completely in terms of from the operations because there's no combustion anymore. You still have all your grid-sourced emissions. So To get to zero operating emissions, you're completely dependent on the grid itself decarbonizing. And the good news there is that that is happening extremely quickly, even faster than almost anybody would have expected. If you look at a graph of solar, wind, and water contributions to the grid over the last 2-3 years, it's purely exponential. It's actually pretty amazing. Pretty much every projection from, say, 2021 or 2020 is under where we are today. It is highly dependent on where you are. For example, some states, they still burn coal. And in that case, your electricity might be pretty dirty. But pretty much everywhere, you're going to have a lower carbon footprint today if you switch to a heat pump. And in some places like California or Washington, where it's very, very high renewables, you could actually have pretty darn close to zero emissions because your electricity is all produced by renewables.
So Mike and Maaike, this one's for you. So what got you interested in working on this project, and what did the kickoff process look like once you signed on to do this design work?
Well, I remember some of the first meetings we had with Paul and being just really impressed with his vision and his enthusiasm and his passion to move the needle in this space. And as we had multiple conversations, it also dawned on us that, hey, we're actually potentially starting very, very early, which has always to us a better setup for being really integrated and sort of making design really integral to the whole process of this development. I think our meetings started predominantly with a lot of conversations early on. What we realized was, the technology is already fairly developed. It's pretty mature. But the biggest obstacle we saw was to figure out ways that we could really make this feel more built in and make it also as compact and small as possible. So we started to do a lot of volume research actually on current units and trying to understand how and where can we push the envelopes to make it something that people would be more excited about having built into their living spaces. So we did actually a lot of volumetric studies very early on, and we went to each other's homes and installed them on the walls to really get a better feel for, what are these volumes and what actually is acceptable and what are the dimensions that we would like to aim for.
So if you take the same size in terms of volume and you create a shape that's really elongated but narrow in another dimension versus one that's more evenly proportioned, it's sort of the same size, but it's a different effect in the context of a room. And so if we talk about a kickoff meeting, it's almost like a series of meetings where we would meet in each other's houses and put these mock-ups on the wall. And we would really find hey, these types of shapes really feel like they fit in more, and these other types of shapes don't. And it was almost like an evolving process of just learning and discovering by really approaching the project with sort of a blank slate.
Which probably give our listeners a visual of what this thing looks like. What you're describing is it's a beautiful box-like appliance thing that mounts higher up on a wall that then connects to, presumably, Paul, it's a heat exchanger that's outside. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, there's actually a heat exchanger on the inside box too.
Okay.
It does what it sounds like. Exchange energy between the air and the fins, the metal fins. And then what it is outside is there's a compressor inside an outdoor unit that has a heat exchanger. We just call it the outdoor unit and the indoor unit.
Also, I think maybe it's something that maybe some of your listeners have probably seen out in the wild. You've probably seen, they call them mini splits that are mounted on the wall. Sometimes you see them in hotel rooms. Sometimes you see them in people's houses, but it's not as common in the US as it is maybe in Asia or in Europe. And so when we looked at the market of what's out there, we really sort of cringed at the way these products sort of stick out when you put them in the room. They don't necessarily look like they're designed to fit in. They look more like they're designed to work, very functional. The technology is great, but they're not really designed within the context of architecture and interiors. So that was also a big part of the conversation early on, is how do we design this to be really thoughtful about what it does to a person's interior when they install it? And that was the sort of avenue we saw to increase adoption of heat pumps, to make it so people that maybe weren't willing to put something on their wall in the past might see this unit and say, wow, that's a lot smaller. It's a lot more low profile. It's more thoughtfully designed, better in every way, really. And that was really our goal, is to get to that place.
That's the thing that I think really captured Eli and I's attention, is that here's a problem about addressing a challenge in the future that we've got to solve climate change in lots of different ways. But design specifically is the key to driving adoption. It's aspirational. It's a beautiful product. There's some thoughtful things, like there's a light built in, which is kind of added functionality, or, it's attractive. It reminded me, like, when the Nest thermostat came out, that design was the thing where people like, I don't know if I need a new thermostat, but I want one because that is beautiful and I want to be part of that. And it feels very much like that, where it's so beautiful, you just want to be part of that. So design is so important to your strategy.
Agreed. Thank you for saying that. It's just really nice to hear that comes through.
Yeah. And Mike and Maaike, I mean, in terms of like design principles, you talked a little bit about process and volume and structure and so forth, but how are you thinking about it in terms of design principles that you wanted to bring to this object that's in people's homes?
I think like what Mike mentioned earlier was that it was really important to consider the context of these units. So size, can it fit above doors and windows? The volume, does it feel overpowering in even smaller rooms, or is it something that feels appropriate architecturally in rooms? We deliberately designed it to be more rectilinear and more like cabinetry so that it would feel more built in rather than, for instance, more of like an appliance, for instance, like something electronic. Another principle was to think about longevity. What elements can we design for so that this product would have a long life and be maintained really easily and be a delight that you would want to have this in your home for a long time?
I think with the longevity principle, one example of that is initially when we started the project, the product was going to have a remote control, and that was sort of just assumed. And I think as we went through the process of developing it, we were proposing different ideas for how you would control the unit. And we did have some concepts that were remote controls, but then we were kind of all thinking like, this is more of a permanent part of your house. How can we make it feel more like something that's built in as opposed to like something that's a temporary appliance, like a TV that has a remote control? And most of the units out on the market now, they have like, pretty complex looking remote control. So that's how we decided to make it more of a thermostat, and you would have like a thermostat in each room if you wanted to. And the remote control, if you want to have that functionality, is really in the app. So you can use your phone to control it remotely. But just having a place where anybody in the family knows where it is, they can control it from that one place where it's either mounted on the wall or it's wired as a tabletop device, gave more of a feeling of permanence.
We'll return to the conversation after this quick break. Web designers, this one's for you. I've got 1 minute to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things that you can do from start to finish in 1 minute or less on Studio. You can adapt your designs for every device using responsive AI, reuse assets like templates, widgets, sections, and design libraries across sites and share them with your team. Switch up the styling of hundreds of web pages. That means fonts, layouts, colors, all in a click. Add no-code animations and gradient backgrounds right in the editor. Export your designs from Figma to Wix Studio in just a click. Oh, and one more big one. Package and deliver everything your client needs in one smooth handover. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. And now, back to the show.
So one thing we're curious about too is, so there's the product itself, which is beautifully designed, but that goes beyond that into, there's elements of service design, and how does this integrate into a household? How do you work within constraints around permitting or people getting rebates or things like that? So maybe all of you could speak to that. Paul, first from sort of the business and entrepreneurial side, and then from the design side, how did you think about those elements?
The really kind of founding strategy of everything we're doing is, I think you could call design. It's real focus on homeowners and the pain points that they experience while trying to bring into systems into their lives today, and just trying to solve for them. So create design solutions for all those. And some of those pain points look like interactions with the product, like the remote control. Some of those look like objections about how it will fit into their home, like the design and customizability of the front panel. Those design solutions are very much kind of in the core industrial design work that we've done with Maaike. But some of those solutions are like, I don't know what these things are supposed to cost. And I get this first quote, it's bigger than I think, and I'm feeling like I might get ripped off. Designing a solution to that is not, it looks more like bringing price transparency to the market or empowering the consumer to make better decisions. Another concern might be, are people going to show up on time? How are they going to treat my home when they get here? Someone with a hole in my wall, what's going to happen? Like all that kind of stuff. And so we are very much taking the lens of owning the end-to-end experience and mapping out all those pain points and then using the right tool in the toolbox to solve them. And so everything I just mentioned are things we're thinking about. We've brought price transparency. There's pricing on our website. That doesn't happen with any other mini split out there. We've built a software system so that people can, like I said, get a quote for their home, but also schedule an installation date in a kind of like modern experience. And then the permitting process and all that, we handle that too. That can't be completely self-serve because there's a lot of bespoke stuff. You need to know about the home. You need to know where people are located. And the principle there that we've kind of worked with is that people want to develop trust with kind of one entity, one person, ideally, really one human relationship. And so the fact that Quilt is a company that both builds a product and organizes the installation and sells the product, I think in and of itself is some innovation because there's no question of alignment, right? It's not like you call a contractor, you know if they're selling you a product just because they represent it or if it's actually what they're recommending is the best. Here we're very transparent about it, right? We make the product. We're obviously going to sell you a Quilt product. But also, like, if something breaks, you come back to us. It's not like who backs the warranties, the person who installed it or the person who made it. It's just us. The way I see it from where I sit is that we just got to own the whole landscape of problems and then bring to bear the right type of design solution given the nature of the problem.
And I think from a design standpoint, the inspiring thing about the approach that Quilt has taken since day one is really the desire to make this experience better in every way. So as we're designing the product experience, we're not just simply like trying to improve a little bit on what's already out there. We're really just thinking about all the ways that we can make this better for the end user. And that's a really big difference from the way most products are approached. A lot of times you already kind of know your limitations of how far you're willing to go. But I think with Quilt, it's been kind of an open question, like how can we make this better? And it could be everything from like how you change the filters to how does it match the decor in your house? What's the size? Any number of pain points that the user has, it was like open for us to work with Quilt to figure out a better way to do it.
And Maaike, were you in this design process? Did you map out the customer journey and think of all these touch points where things could go sideways, where you could potentially find a solution for like, okay, here's what the packaging should be like and the messages that should come out here. Here's what the interaction is like when the service person comes out, et cetera. There's so many different places where, you could get a little confused about how do I get my rebate, federal rebate for installing fuel efficient appliance like this. Was that part of your design remit?
It wasn't actually necessary working with Paul and team. It's like a sort of a design strategy aspect that wasn't really necessary on this program. We noticed that when we did a very early on brainstorm session, once the leadership team was formed, that, we were sort of asking these questions like, what's the ideal experience? What are the pain points currently? What are opportunities? We were really sort of digging up all those sort of like questions, like where can we really bring innovation and delight, just a better system overall. The entire team was able to contribute to that set of work. It was very obvious that everybody was extremely passionate about the details and about all the touch points and started to have a very, more deeper and deeper and deeper understanding of all the opportunities.
Yeah, it's almost like making this product better in any way we could identify was not a controversial thing that we had to convince anybody about. If anything, Quilt was always pushing us. Like Paul would, a lot of times after we present a concept or come to some sort of a design direction, Paul would typically think about it over the weekend really deeply and come back with like really thoughtful observations about, hey, I lived with this idea for a while and here's like how I'm thinking about it now. And they'd be things that really challenged us as designers. Like you don't often get that sort of level of thoughtfulness when you have a client relationship. And this almost felt like the team made us feel like we're part of the company as well. And like we're invested in terms of our all wanting to make this product successful, but also just making us feel like he's going to push us to be the best designers we can be. Usually we're our harshest critics, yes. But in this case, I think Paul and team have really pushed us to do best work that we can do.
It seems like one of the challenges, and I guess you could frame it as a design challenge, but it's maybe more of a marketing challenge, is just around awareness. And to give a personal anecdote, this was 4 or 5 years ago, so I don't think your product existed back then, but a family of wood rats made a nest in our heating system. And so they totally destroyed it, and we had to replace it. But at the time, maybe I'd heard about a heat pump, but I didn't really have a great awareness about, this would be a more energy efficient solution. And again, your product wasn't on the market, but I'm just curious from a design perspective, how you think about bringing more awareness to this.
With it being somewhat of an established technology, with its current implementation, it doesn't speak to people. And that's why it's really hard for people to connect with it. And that was really our challenge. Like, how do we make something that people can relate to, that they feel excited about? Where do we find a delight? The stories of, oh, wow, that's wonderful. I want to see that. I want to try that. To really put this in a different category.
I'll add to that in that there's a ton of tailwind in the space. And so we got a little bit lucky with the timing, to be totally honest. So 2-3 months after Quilt was founded, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed by Congress, largest climate bill ever in history. And depending on how you look at it, the largest single subsidy in that entire thing was heat pumps. And so that really sparked a lot of policy interest and therefore journalists' interests. And for about the first year of this company, it seemed like every week or next, some major publication had some heat pump, the climate solution you've never read. There's all this sort of awareness building in the category. And what that really did was give us potential energy that we could capture on, because a lot of people are interested in heat pumps, but it kind of feels right now like it's all push. Like the government is pushing you, rebates are pushing you, you should do this versus you want to do this. And it really reminded me of the early days of EVs. So early EVs, there were a lot of EVs before Tesla showed up and made the Model S, which was the first car that people got really excited about that was also an EV. There was like the Leaf, which kind of sold okay, but it was still kind of a climate car, like buy it because you should, it's good for the world. And then what completely changed the inflection point of that market was when they produced a product, like in this case it was Tesla, that was just cool. Like people just wanted it. Like the Model S was faster than a Porsche. Like people couldn't believe it. And so if you remove friction around something that's already trying to move, and it already is moving, the heat pump market is already developing, but there's all this friction around it. All these pain points we've discussed basically manifest themselves as, things holding it back. So if you remove that friction, the whole thing's going to happen a lot faster. And so I would just say that in the awareness building of this category, it's almost more like realizing the potential that's already been created by this movement much larger than us.
How did design play into the conversations with investors?
I mean, design is one of these funny things. Like, what do you really mean when you say that? I think at the highest level, it's like trying to solve problems. And maybe if you want to get a little more specific about it, it's like people are thinking about it and solving problems in some kind of physical or visual manifestation of that, right? And I think particularly with consumer products where you are trying to elicit a sort of desire that isn't a quantitative thing. It's not a pure ROI in dollars. It's just people see something and they want it. And that je ne sais quoi often is design. There's something aesthetically pleasing, comforting. There's some message or feeling about the product that makes you feel good. And the nice thing about that is you kind of just see it and And so investors typically are not designers. Most of the ones we've spoken to, there are a few out there and that's awesome. But most of the ones we're speaking to are more financial background. And I think they'd see the product and they're like, these people know how to get the design done. And then they would, quiz me on all the stuff they're really comfortable about digging deep into. But I think that was kind of, people saw it and they trusted us. And it's absolutely a prerequisite for the consumer side, but it was never really a question because I think we just kind of had the proof in the pudding.
We talked a lot about the design side of things, but obviously you can't build these types of appliances without engineers. And early in my career, I was sort of that bridge between the designer, maybe the industrial design side of things, the manufacturing and engineering side of things. And I know sometimes there are things that get lost in the translation. You gotta have the right partners to execute well. So I'm just curious if there's any stories on either side about some of the opportunities you found there for good collaboration or any friction you encountered in that process?
Well, just to kind of explain our relationship with Matt, on the previous project that we worked on with him when he was at Google, he would actually joke with us or mess with us a bit. He knows how sensitive we are to all the details, and he set up this whole presentation where he was going to show us that he needed to add all of these holes onto the product we were working on. He went through this whole reasoning of why, and he watched our faces, and we pushed back and had this long conversation. At the end, he said, "Oh, I'm just kidding." So that was kind of like even before we worked on Quilt together. So we had a really good rapport with him, and I think that good rapport translated as the Quilt engineering team grew, and I think it became just more of a natural collaboration. There wasn't really a lot of pushback. Sometimes there is a lot of pushback with engineering and design and some tension there, but I see the Quilt engineering team as, all caring about the design just as much as we do. So it's not like everybody's there to just do their role and make sure their role comes out good. Everybody's there to make sure the product comes out good. And so that means that when we're designing something, we care about how it's engineered and we care about whether it's actually producible. And when they're engineering something, that they care about how it's going to look and all of the sort of design repercussions. And in a way, engineering and industrial design, they're almost like an artificial cutoff to make it so that there's two distinct roles, but really they're really more of a blend. And I think in cases where the project really works well, it's when that blend is really truly a blend. It's not like this is my role and that's your role.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The more there's a give and take and blending of skills and perspectives, people work well together. A lot of the people listening to our show might be in a position where they're kind of earlier in their design career. And I think that especially the generation coming up that's coming after Eli and my generation, there's a mind for trying to do something that is mission driven, that is for the greater good, and mindful of the impact of how we spend such a large piece of our life is at work. So hopefully that work is good work. I'm curious what advice any of you would have for people who are early in their design career for doing work that is meaningful.
If you pick a category of product that you want to focus on, and if that category is already inherently good for whether it's the planet or socially or whatever it is that you want to have a positive impact on, then anything you do to improve that product is going to go towards that goal. And I think for Quilt, it's a really good example. It's not like we're trying to make a product less bad. It's that we're trying to make this product successful. And if it becomes more desirable, it's good for the planet. And so that's very different than if you're designing an electric toaster and you're trying to make it more sustainable. You might not have as much impact in a typical industrial design role. So I think just picking a category that already is inherently impactful in the way you want it to be is already a great first step.
I think the best way to make great impact is to be really good at what you do. When I'm thinking about working with Quilt, I had to find people like Maaike and our engineering team and other folks. If I was coming out of school and I had sort of an impact, loosely positive direction, but maybe it wasn't exactly 10 out of 10, but I could learn from really, really good people and I knew I'd learn really good skills and I'd be pushed and I was just going to really accelerate my development versus a 10 out of 10, I'm working for, save the world, but it's maybe not as great of an organization or there's something about it that's what I might trade off my growth. I would say take the first one. And, I'm the CEO of a climate company, but I still think that's the right thing because we just need great people to do this work. And I think the flip side is no matter what you do, you can probably find a way to have impact. I mean, it's almost like there's not really a tension between the business and the impact if you do it right, because the way that we will have a bigger impact is by building a business that allows us to fund our growth. So by having a stronger economic engine, we can make more impact. And at an individual level, by having a stronger skill set, you can have more impact. So I think your first priority has to be to build that skill set. Now, I don't think you want to cross the line. I don't think you would feel good if you're going to go do something you feel really ethically bad about, but it's okay if it's not, the very first thing you do after school is, You don't have to save the world on your very first day out of school. There's a long career ahead of you.
Yeah, that's a constant message to our students. It's just like, and I was there myself as a young student. It's like, you're very idealistic often when you're young and you want that first job to be the end all be all, but very rarely is that true.
Curious what all of you have been reading, watching, listening to that is inspiring.
I have to admit, I haven't been reading as much as I generally like to, and it's one of my sort of like personal goals is to get more into it. But I have been slowly making my way through The Right Stuff, which is a book by Tom Wolfe I think he wrote in the early 70s. Yeah. It's about fighter pilots who then become the first Gemini astronauts. It's funny how you read books that seem like absolutely unrelated to your day-to-day, and then things connect. And it's just these people who they're ambitious and they're so motivated to do what they feel is the right thing for the world. I'm not going to be able to very articulately put this, but I've found it very inspiring. And I didn't really realize it until I read it, how much these people really felt like they were working on the most important problem in their world, which was, the Cold War and preventing nuclear war, which of course would have been a really big thing. So I'm glad that didn't happen. Thank you to all those people. Just the level of like dedication and like sacrifice that these people are willing to make is pretty impressive. I think it's good for us to all to remember that throughout human history, even recent human history, people have gone above and beyond to make the world we have today. So it's kind of just trying to feel inspired by carrying on that baton in some way.
Well, the book that comes to mind for me is The Overstory. It's a book that my daughter had to read in her immersive class in school. And Mike started reading. I'm still waiting for him to read it so I could read it too.
Yeah, I picked it up and I've just been really enthralled by it. It's really about trees, but it doesn't feel like it's about trees. It's about people and their stories, but they're all sort of intertwined with trees. Our daughter took this class where she read this book partially in the middle of the woods with her classmates, really in a remote place with no cell connection or anything. And this book is really incredible. I'm not done with it yet, but I would highly recommend it, The Overstory.
I haven't finished the book, but I'm really enjoying The Overstory. And it reminded me of this other book that I read years ago called The Forest Unseen, which was by this author, David Haskell, who's a biologist, who sat down in a forest basically every day for an entire year. He just observed this 3-foot circle in the forest, which sounds like how much can happen in the space of, that little amount of but it's amazing what happens and what he observes. So if you like The Overstory, that's another one that's worth exploring.
I have another one to add on, which is Searching for the Mother Tree. It's a wonderful book. This woman she's a scientist but also like a Wild West sort of interesting person, and it's her personal story, but it's also about the interconnectedness of trees and microrhizomes and all these different organisms. It's wonderful.
I think the Quilt project has been one of the first projects where all these different elements had to work together and play together, but it being its own little ecosystem. So when, Paul talks about the dial, it having its constrained and its sort of, ideal setups, but it all is connected to how, current homes are laid out and its sort of context of use. Similarly, the indoor unit and the outdoor unit has its own space where it needs to live. Yet it all is connected and all has to work together seamlessly. And then, Quilt as an organization is so multifaceted and multi-layered too. It's been really wonderful to see that sort of all come to life and sort of grow into something just super exciting.
That's wonderful. Well, where can people learn more about Quilt and more about Mike and Maaike, your studio?
Quilt is quilt.com. We definitely paid a bit for that domain, so hopefully people can remember it because that's why we paid the premium. QUILT.com.
And you could just search Mike and Maaike, and I guess how to spell it, but it's MAAIKE, and you'll find us.
Fantastic. And of course, we'll link in the show notes. But thank you for your work, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
This episode was produced by Eli Woolery and me, Aaron Walter, with engineering and production support from Brian Paik of Pacific Audio. If you found this episode useful, we hope that you'll leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to finer shows. Or simply drop a link to the show in your team's Slack channel, designbetterpodcast.com. It'll really help others discover the show. Until next time.